All right, welcome everybody to the Sprint Jump Throw Performance Podcast. I'm Joel Reinhardt with my co-host Andrew Cormier. Lucky today to have on the show our guest Gabe Sanders, who is the director of track and field and cross country at Boston University. Thanks for coming on, Coach.
I appreciate it, Joel, and I humbly appreciate you guys inviting me on.
Yeah, absolutely. We've been you were one of the tops on our list when we started going through names, and happy that we could finally coordinate together. So we're going to hop right into one of our first questions. So with your kind of growth and progression in the coaching field, you started at competed at a Division I setting, and then were kind of a team manager in a Division I setting, but then started really coaching at Williams in the Division III setting, and then kind of moved up the Colgate, BU, Stanford, even though like those last three are all Division I, they're kind of getting exponentially bigger in terms of athletics program and whatnot. How has that step kind of formed or shaped how you've gone about like handling more and more, complex positions and roles?
Well, I think we need to step back and not look at it in terms of, you've been at a Division III, you've been at a mid-major, you've been at a Power 5. I'll never forget, I went to Williams as my first professional job after being at the University of Michigan in undergrad, as an attempted student athlete, which is a story unto itself, and then really a student manager, and then a student assistant coach. Went to Williams, and I came back in the summer. I saw all of my old teammates, and or even over the phone. They said, "Hey man, what's it like coaching D3 kids?" I'm like, "No different. No different. You coach them." Because this is something that at the very beginning of my career, the mindset has to be you be as competitive as possible at the level that you're at, and then you try and kick it up a notch, right? So at the end of the day, you have to be dialed in to improve the people around you, and whether that is the student athletes, whether that's your colleagues and the fellow assistants, whether that's the department itself. So it always has to be a mindset of like a growth mindset, not this finite of like, all right, this is a Division III kid, so I can only coach him in a certain way. It's, just how can I become a better coach? And I think I've had that mentality ever since I started my professional coaching career, is just pushing the envelope of wherever I was at and see what can we do to maximize this situation. And I've been lucky that I've been surrounded by people with a similar mindset. That's why, at Division III, in a particular year, we won the Open New England Championships at a Division III school in 2007. That's why in our second year together, we won a Division III national title. We had a young man at the Williams at that team that was the number one ranked overall discus thrower in the country, regardless of division. He was a 61-meter discus thrower. Like D3, that didn't matter. I coached some pretty good kids, and you just compete as competitive as possible at the level that you're at. At Colgate, I was the 3 years before I was there, they were 7th place in the Patriot League. And it's like, you know what? We're not going to win it in a year, but damn it, what are we going to do to try and maximize the situation, be the best that we could possibly be? And we jumped to 4th place. And that was literally the World Series for that program, getting in the top half of the league. That hasn't happened before or since. And, I pride myself in trying to do things that you're not supposed to do at certain schools. Stanford University is not supposed to have a 4x4 in the national championship. Stanford University typically doesn't have a 4x1. Academic institutions typically don't have speed power programs at a high level, typically. And my thing is, why not? Let's do the damn thing. Let's get after it. Let's be exceptional. Let's try and be the standard. And that's like our new motto here is when I first got here is like, now let's be exceptional. Let's be you, So now moving forward, we're trying to grow that and say, let's be exceptional, let's be elite, but now let's work to be the standard, be you. Like that's kind of our motto and catchphrase. So I think you got to have that mindset of like, just push the envelope, continue to better yourself, continue to be dialed in and be present where you're at. And the rest just kind of takes care of itself.
That's awesome.
Yeah, you actually alluded to it quickly, which leads into our next question. So regardless of division, every school that you've worked at have pretty much considered like pretty high academic schools. The having like being at places where going in like, okay, the academic load is much higher than the typical institution, has that, I mean, has being at those spots all along helped you kind of shape your view of like, okay, I have to be viewing this from a holistic stress model or else it's all going to fall apart? And how has that kind of helped you as you've gone along?
100%. I think you hit the nail on the head of thinking in terms of a holistic aspect. And that's not to say that other schools in certain areas or categories are not smart schools or what have you, but, categorically, empirically, like a Stanford, a BU, Williams, like those are really rigorous academic institutions. And you have to take a step back and look at the whole picture. And again, from the very beginning of my career, even before I started professionally, being at, undergrad at the University of Michigan, like academic stress, social stress, personal stress, like stress is stress. And you have to factor that in your programming, because I think that's the mistake sometimes when you look at, traditional periodization model, looking at, whether it's 3 up, 1 down, 2 up, 1 down, conjugated vertical integration, finals week doesn't give a shit if you're in the 3rd week of a 3 up, 1 down. Finals week doesn't give a shit. Like finals week is going to be there and it's going to get after it. So it doesn't matter where you're at in your periodization model. So that's actually allowed me to be much more fluid in my training, looking at things from a holistic standpoint. Like if you're sitting down, if you're in a collegiate setting, and if you're sitting down and you're looking at and creating periodization models, and you say, okay, first let's look at situation. Everything's in a vacuum. Okay, it's perfect. We got 12 weeks in this term, so we can go 3 up, 1 down 3 times. Beautiful. Okay, what happens if in the second cycle in week 2 it's midterms? Or what happens depending on the time of the year? Like there is also a difference between being a computer science engineer versus, let's say, maybe humanities major. Like comp sci majors, dude, they're not like midterms, finals, they're not sleeping, they're napping. Like they can't just pull an all-nighter and do a 10 to 12 page paper. So there are a lot of things that factor into what you're able to do and or not do with your student athletes. And that also brings into the equation of the other side, the relationship and level of communication that you have with the athletes. These are living beings that have personalities, that you develop a relationship, and you have to make sure that they're okay coming to you and saying, Coach, I'm getting slammed this week. Because I know we've all been in that situation where we find out about it after the fact. It's like, well, why didn't you tell me? It's like, no, Coach, I'm not soft, or I didn't want to bother you, or like, it's like, no, I need to know those things. Like, I need to know you were up until 3 a.m. finishing up that problem set. Like, and then that bleeds into a conversation of time management. That bleeds into a conversation of resources that are available. So I would say I did stray away a little bit from your original question, but I would say from the beginning, being at academic-oriented institutions has forced me and really allowed me to look at a 360 view of performance training.
Coach, looking at you'd mentioned personalities, and something Joel and I had talked about a little bit before was actually as a part of the recruiting process. And I just watched a presentation given by Bushek Nader on the recruiting process when he was at LSU and how important the personality fit is with the athlete. How much do you feel like you can allow? Obviously, it's going to be allowed and play a huge role in the kid choosing to come to the school just as much as you are choosing them, right? Like their comfort level with you. Do you guys do any sort of actual personality testing as a part of your recruiting process, or is it so highly academically driven that that's not really something that you can do?
Oh, you have to, because if you're just looking at academics, then it's just, again, you're looking at very binary black and white factors. You're looking at, okay, how fast do they run? How high do they jump? How far do they throw? And then, okay, what's their GPA? What's their test score? How many APs are they in? All these things are important. But again, looking at the holistic picture, is this someone that I will not tolerate? Is this someone that I will enjoy 2 to 3 hours a day, 5 to 6 days a week together with, on road trips, what have you? And or is this someone that I think will be open to having hard conversations? Is this someone that I anticipate, I can grow with? That's very, very important. Now, again, the first couple of things have to be in place. Is this person is someone that is an athletic category that you deem that, is going to help you in the program and the university grow? Is this someone academically not only viable, but someone that can thrive and someone that you can brag about once they graduate? And then after that, okay, is this someone that I mesh with? Is this someone that is going to be a good fit here for me and the program? I mean, early in my career, this didn't happen to me, but I was sitting in on a recruiting call in my early years with another assistant, and he called a young man from let's just say he called a young man, and he was talking to him for about 10, 15 minutes, telling him about BU, and he, was academically viable. He had some athletic marks that would have really helped us right away. And after him telling him and going back and forth a little bit about, the university, the program, he said, so yeah, you got any more questions? Or he said, do you have any questions that I can answer for you, or I haven't answered yet? And the kid paused, and I could hear on the speaker, he said, yeah, coach, I got a question. Now, be honest with me, coach. What are the girls like in Boston? Like, oh, man, where to go with that one? Out of all the things we could have asked after hearing about the facilities, hearing about the academics, hearing about the city, what are the, there's a lot of them. There's a lot of girls here. It's real diverse. But, yeah, any other questions? Needless to say, that's the first and last phone call that kid got.
That's amazing.
Questions like, is there study hall required? Or coach, like, what kind of gear do we get? Coach, what if I feel like it's just for me, like a lot of superficial questions, not the nuts and bolts of, what is your and instead of, is there study hall, do you guys have academic support available? Instead of, okay, coach, what kind of gear do we get? Coach, what are the meets that we're going to be going to? Like that's a big part of, again, is this person going to be a good fit for me and good fit for the program? Because if you're recruiting someone just on numbers, like, oh yeah, this person's going to help me, they'll be a conference finalist right away, I'll be able to work with them. That's not justification.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And coach, looking into some of the psychological aspects, I mean, obviously track, there's a role in kind of like race models, the psychology, but do you ever take stock of where your kids are at from just like a maturity level? And do you take that into account of like specifically addressing things at certain times of the year to help the athletes grow? Like I know you said making sure that they grow as people as well. Is there anything that you kind of put into place as almost like a periodization model for the actual like psychological development almost of your athletes?
I think consistency is the most important. Having regular check-ins that for some people that might be weekly, bi-weekly. I'd say if you can check in every 2 to 4 weeks, in their first year, I think that's really, really good. And I think the periodization ends up taking care of itself when you have those check-ins, just because it becomes very organic.
Yep.
After a while, because sometimes it might be, hey, come on, stop in by my office, let's chat, or, depending on your campus setup, like, getting lunch with them in the cafeteria, whether that is having a coffee having coffee with a group of them in the union, whatever that might look like. I think trying to keep it as organic and as real as possible, that piece is a way to help that relationship grow. And to your point again, sometimes we overlook that we're working with, in the collegiate setting, we're working with as young as 17-year-old young men and women, really boys and girls. Still, they're still kids, to as old as 22. And even 22 in the big scheme of things, that's still a kid, you know? So sometimes we have to step back and think, okay, is this kid really trying to fail, or they just lack a bit of maturity and I have to help them along the way? You know, and realize, let me have a conversation with this young man or young woman, and let me have 2, 3, 4 conversations. Then it's like, all right, now I got to talk at you, and we got to figure this out. And I think, you know, you'll attract more bees with honey than vinegar. You know, so yeah, that's a really important piece in understanding. Like, again, relationships are a real thing. Like, human emotions are a real thing, and sometimes they just need to know that you care.
Mm-hmm. So we dove into recruiting a little bit. So you, I guess sorry, I'm gathering my thoughts in my brain. Being the recruiting coordinator at BU your first time around there, and having, you know, inevitably having to have a hand in kind of not just your specific event group, do you think that eventually helped you becoming the director and overseer of everything when you
Yeah.
eventually got to that position?
Yeah, for sure. Because it allowed me to have a holistic view of the program. It got me out of my own way. It forced me, and I've never been this way, but it forced me and encouraged me not to be selfish in my viewpoint of recruiting. Because at the end of the day, when the program wins, we win. And you know, granted, my event area, like, I always recruited my event area hard, but making sure that, you know, we got in contact with throwers, that the jumpers were well taken care of, trying to figure out our efforts to make the whole entire program better, to make the university more attractive. And then in turn going to a place like Stanford and having that skill set, but getting another perspective of it, because the jumps coach was the recruiting coordinator there, and I learned a lot from him, you know, understanding, you know, what you need to look for and what you need to understand about your program to recruit it effectively as well. So that definitely, you know, those 2 experiences, being recruiting coordinator here once before, and then, you know, being essentially an apprentice at a really high-end academic athletic program, really has helped shape my view of how we do things here. And it's really helped me encourage the staff to have that holistic worldview of things as well. And like, we cheer for each other when we have our group chat, and we talk about, you know, young men and young women that commit, and we're pumped. We're pumped because the jumpers didn't just get better, the program got better. The throwers didn't just get better, the program got better, and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And even, I guess, another aspect of that I wanted to touch on was you being, you know, a sprints coach. Just coming from the kind of speed, power, or sprints perspective, what do you think are the pros and cons of that kind of almost bias and viewpoint when you're looking at things as the director?
I think that's a personal disposition. I think you might have people that are of the opinion that you're in charge and you got to lead the way. You know, you're in charge. Like, all right, if I was the cross country distance coach, that's our number 1 priority. You know, that's where all the money's going to go, and no matter what. And or I'm the sprints coach, so we got to go all in on the sprints. You know, I got to lead the way. I have to step back, and if I have to decide, you know, if we're going to be a conference level program, we can't just be speed power oriented in the sprints. We need jumpers, we need throwers, we need distance runners. And what is the best model to carry that out? And also, honestly, as a director, you know, what is my personal bandwidth? You know, what's my personal bandwidth, and what am I capable of taking on? I'm currently in a position where I don't have an assistant sprints coach. So I don't have an assistant that can warm up the athletes for me or make my recruiting calls for me. While I can currently have to, you know, plan the budget, I have to look at travel, I have to look at the meet schedule, I have to do many things on my plate while supporting the rest of the program and the coaches in it. So do I want to lead the way as far as athletes, you know, or do I maybe want to shrink down my group over time and then maybe grow it out a little bit? what is the best strategy for making the program as good as it can be? Being an academic institution in the Northeast, we should be pretty good in cross-country distance. Like, that should be a given for us. I think you'd have to be blind, deaf, and dumb not to acknowledge that here. So even though I'm sitting in the chair and I'm the sprints coach, I want to have a national level cross-country program in time here. And I'll do everything that I can to support our distance coach and support our distance runners and support our program to that end. Because at the end of the day, they wear Boston across their chest just like I do. They're no less of a member of the team than the sprinters.
Mm-hmm. So when you did shift into the wearing the director hat, and you go from not just recruiting student athletes, but then to having to recruit some coaches underneath you, how much did you have to, I guess, how much were you thinking about that even as you were just coming up as an assistant? And then also like, okay, how much did you have to almost shift your mindset into like, okay, not just how am I coaching, but how much freedom / not freedom or not, how do you kind of fit into that model of like, okay, I need to hire people underneath me. I have a vision for this program, but I also want to give a little bit of autonomy and freedom. How do you kind of surf that wave, I guess?
Yeah, I like to think I come from a school of thought of, identify strong candidates as far as, the X's and O's and their coaching pedigree, what have you. Not sell them on the vision, but tell them the vision. I don't want to have to sell you on a vision. You should be excited about the vision that I have for this program. Tell them the vision and in turn sell them on the vision, or indirectly sell them on the vision. And then in turn, are they going to be a good fit? Are they going to someone that I'm going to enjoy having meetings with? And are they intrinsically motivated? Are they excited to work for and with me? Get them in here and go. I think it's as simple as that. When you have an organization where everyone is on the same page in terms of, yep, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This is how we want to do it. This is the direction we want to go. Here are the parameters. I know that, we don't have the logistics to do this. I know we don't have the logistics to do that. I know we can do this and I can work with that. Then go. I don't feel the need to micromanage you or micromanage your workouts or anything like that. And if I hired you, then I trust you enough to do the job and get things done. And I know a page out of Ralph White, who I worked for at Williams College. One of the first real lessons, direct lessons I learned about being an assistant is, when I ask you to do something, I don't expect it to be done. I assume it's done. And he said it in those words, but with a different tone. But I mean, it made all the sense in the world to me. It's like, I just am going to assume that it's done. If it's not done, then what are we doing here? What's the issue? But I don't think I rule by an iron fist. It's like, hey, this is our mission and it is my vision and you're excited about it. And we're all in this together. Let's do it. Let's get it done. So that's my vantage point. And I'm fairly diplomatic. I'd say I operate as a democratic dictator in a sense. I want you to have an opinion. I want you to tell me your opinion. I want you to feel comfortable telling me that you disagree with something. I want you to feel comfortable fighting for something and knowing that almost every time I'm going to want to say yes, but I can't always say yes to everything. And I'll tell you why. And whether you agree with it or not, once we leave the room, we leave the conference room, we leave my office or your office, then we're all on the same page. That's what it comes down to. And I think with that, it's a very healthy. You don't walk into a meeting thinking, okay, who's he going to cuss out this time? You don't walk away from a meet. If your kids had a poor showing, you're not worried that, all right, Gabe's going to read my ass on Monday. I'm going to put my arm around you, or even metaphorically speaking, and be like, hey, looked like it was a tough go. How are things looking? Is everything okay? Is this what the plan was? At the end of the day, like, our biggest focus is the conference championship. So I'm not going to panic if at an invite we don't perform well or anything like that. As long as you feel like things are going in the right direction. And I'm going to be, and also with my assistants, I'm going to be your biggest fan. I want you to outshine. Like, if you're outshining me, then a good thing is happening. And I hope by year 4, 5, or 6 that my assistants are getting phone calls. I hope they are. You know why? Because that means they're doing really good stuff. Too many head coaches I've heard about are scared to death that their assistant coach is getting phone calls and getting poached. Well, if that's happening, good things are happening in your program. And it's up to you to put them in a situation where, like, I can't go. I got it too good here. I got a great boss. He's helped. I got a good salary. I got a good situation. I can't go. So that's incumbent upon me and the head coach to make sure that A, your assistant coaches are getting those calls, and B, they're hanging up on them.
Makes a ton of sense. Coach, almost shifting a little bit towards your, I guess, closer to X's and O's, coming from a majority northern state, cold state schools, did that kind of force your training to go a certain way in terms of, I mean, Joel had talked about it earlier with me of like short to long, but any specifics of having to make sure you have to handle not being able to go outside? Because I also have spent the majority of my time in cold weather states, so I know kind of how that goes.
Yeah, I think cold weather, your weather definitely influences and should influence what you do, but your first and foremost priority is just having a general understanding of training parameters. I don't want to say weather and climate is overrated, but to an extent, athletes have to be able to accelerate. To an extent, they have to be able to touch on max velocity, speed in some capacity. They need to develop work capacity. They need to be put in physiological positions and situations that reflect the demands of their event and sport. So once we have a fairly good grasp of those concepts and fundamentals, then you can adjust to your parameters. Like I've said this anecdote before, I love hills for work capacity and special endurance around the year, but I might not have access to a hill depending on where I'm at. So I'm not going to do that, but I can do, a lot of low-level intensity plyometric circuits. I can do, extended sled runs over 60 to 80 meters with a light sled, looking at posture. One of the greatest speed development systems ever was developed in Colorado with a 35-meter track, and that's Tony Wells, the adapter die system that was developed. I won't say it was developed on accident, but it was developed out of necessity. It was a gentleman that was really well versed in science and physiology and biomechanics, and it also fit to the context of his situation of like, all right, I'm dialing on the specific parameters, and this is the context that I have, so this is what I can do. Maybe he would have done things a little differently had he been in California and had access to grass and had access to this, but I promise you many principles within that programming would have been pretty intact. If you're someone that believes in long to short, a heavier aerobic component in the 400, let's say, you're going to figure out ways to keep that component in, whether you're in a cold climate or a warm climate. So you will tend to shift towards your biases of the programming that you believe in, regardless of the context of where you're at. That definitely some things can be optimized if you're in California and it's 75 every day versus you're in New England and a good day in the winter is 35 degrees, and also if you have a facility like this, or if you're in a high school hallway, how are you going to adapt to that?
So. This is I guess more of an X's and O's question. So seeing I remember seeing it way long ago, not maybe a year or two, and then I went back and found it today, but there was some.
Oh, looks like you froze. If you're still talking,
Times
Joel,
at Stanford.
stop.
Hey, Joel,
Am I
start
good now? Good
Yep.
now?
So you said I found, and then you froze.
Okay. Solid. All right, that's what editing's for, right? All right, so shifting a little bit, more of an X's and O's question. I had seen it way long ago when you originally posted it, and then went back and dug it up the last couple of days. You were doing wickets with weighted vests, and it's something I had seen a handful of people doing recently with wearable resistance in a sprint population and setting. I've personally never been able to implement it just logistically, but benefits, pros, cons, logistical setups, like what are some benefits that you saw from that you liked, didn't like, took moving forward, didn't, shifted, all those?
So that was an idea that I got reviewing some Bondarchuk material and just conceptually thinking in terms of specificity of stimulus, and as far as speed development, I had a group of guys. I was like, we just have to get faster. We have to get better at max velocity running. And once we kind of get that set in, how can we, and I've never had access to appropriate gear, and I've always shied away from overspeed training. But at the end of the day, the thought process behind that is max velocity is not a horizontally biased activity. It is a vertically biased activity, like putting force into the ground to project you forward. So the thought process behind that is, what is a hyper-specific way to address max speed is just running at max speed with added load, but really, really subtle load. So the weight vest that I was using, I was going as light as 2 pounds. It was really subtle. And maybe as heavy as 10 to 12 pounds, depending on the athlete. And just that little bit, I would do kind of a contrast of maybe 2 plus 1. So I might do 2 times 40 from a stand, and then 1 times 60. Or I would do it with flies. And, one example is, you're doing it with enough resistance that the body tricks itself and subconsciously has to add a little bit more force production in order to get the same or close to the optimal output. Then you take that load away, and the body's still it's potentiated, so it's still thinking, I have to have this added oomph to it. Again, I'm not a biomechanist or anything like that, but I'm a layman. Added oomph to it. Now, I had one young man go 2 up, 1 down, a 30 meter fly, and he went what was it? He went 297, 297, and then 283 for a flying 30. That's pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
He had run, and in high school he went like 1065 once, but he was really a 10.7 guy because it was all wind in Texas. And he was like a 21.2 guy once, windy. Got down to 21.0, ran 21.0 flat at the Pac-12 final on lane 1, and also ran 10.43 wind aided, 46.0 on the fly after being a 47.5 kid in high school, and ran 9.4 on the fly. Like, it was a pretty good training effect, so that was the thought process behind that, is creating a situation for potentiation that is hyper specific, and really it's just you're having the body do what it normally does, which is run at speed with just a little bit of added load.
Yeah, because even just that thought process makes a ton of sense to me, because you think, okay, you want to overload acceleration, you're thinking more, generally a little more horizontally than the weight is pulling you horizontally. But I mean, gravity's always going to be acting down. So if you just add a little load to the actual system, that's, even just, as light as 2 pounds or whatever, that's just
And here's
essentially
the
overloading
caveat.
the vertical component.
Yeah, and here's the caveat too, not to cut you off, but to your point again, if you want to overload acceleration, you need to overload it horizontally, i.e. a sled, i.e. a 1080, i.e. a exogene or whatever. And the issue I have with overspeed is it's really hard to correctly program it and get the correct training effect. Because again, maximum velocity sprinting is vertical in nature, force production in a vertical manner, right? And it's force production, a large amount of force in a short amount of time. The issue with overspeed is it's very hard and difficult to dial in, because if I'm being pulled too hard, then just mechanically, I'm not like, I can't put the appropriate amount of force down to the ground that would get an appropriate response, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So unless I have really a 1080, because the beauty of a 1080, again, I don't have it, but I've spoken to a few of my colleagues that have it. The beauty of a 1080 machine is you can dial in the exact frequency that you want the athlete to go. Versus if you just have a tugging rope, there's no way to dial in what that looks like, right? So, and Carol Smith Gilbert is on record. It really made me think about this, because what she also has with her budget USC is she has a long force plate. So she can look at the force production and at contact, and she can figure out the appropriate amount of assistance to make sure that the force production is still optimal. Because what she discovered is if the pull is too great, you won't get the appropriate and optimal output vertically, if that makes sense. So that's why I've always shied away from over speed work or even assisted speed work, because you can't dial it in. You can't appropriate dial in. That's why I like the idea of overloading, again, relatively speaking, 2 to 12 pounds. I like the idea of overloading vertically, because we're looking at force production and output in a vertical fashion.
Yeah, it's almost like if I'm being towed and it's artificially, not dialed in with a 1080, you could be running almost like the same speed, but then not actually getting the vertical projection you need. So then you end up almost, the falling over yourself isn't necessarily coming from being too fast. It's the inability to actually get vertical projection from it.
Well, I mean, how many fancy Instagram training facilities have we seen? We put a guy on a treadmill, and it's like, oh yeah, he's going 25 miles an hour. It's like that dude, like you look up that dude and he's run 11.1 for 100. Like that dude did not just go 25 miles an hour. His legs are spinning at 25 miles an hour. Again, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Like the force production you need, like you're already trying to spin and go back versus actually just hammering down when you, like, that's just one example. So again, you can optimally get on a treadmill with certain athletes, but at a certain extent, like it's a vertical thing when it comes to speed.
Yeah, I like that.
That's almost my thought sometimes with like any sort of assisted plyos that you may see where people like holding the band and doing a vertical jump. Even when they're attacking the ground with it, I feel like it still changes the mechanics enough, because everyone's body position just ends up changing so much when they're doing it. That's hard to transfer. Like, yes, you're trying to teach the slightly faster, like actual change of direction essentially once they hit the ground, but it may not actually end up helping out because you changed it enough where it didn't actually, you changed the mechanics enough where it won't actually carry over, just like pulling in an opposite direction essentially.
Yeah. And another thing too with this is you got to have a fairly advanced and proficient athlete to run at speed when you're adding any kind of load. Like for maybe one of the clips you saw, a majority of the kids had vests on, but we were going over wickets. So, they were actually forced to be in certain mechanical positions. But if an athlete is not moving well or not moving optimally, or if maybe they have a history of stress fracture reactions, they're not contacting properly, you're just exacerbating a problem by adding that external load. So you have to be really, really prejudiced in how you prescribe and who you prescribe these things to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see that. I don't know. I've seen it a fair amount in a team sports setting where it's you almost use like the resisted acceleration as like a crutch, like, oh, it'll just make them fall in nice positions, and it's like, not necessarily. Or they could just be like you just said, or they could just be exacerbating horrible shapes and positions. But now it's with whatever 20 pounds dragging behind them, which puts different stressors on different positions and joints. And it's like, is that really the way to do it, or is there a problem?
And the thing is, you still have to coach, like what you're alluding to. I've seen this before with many strength, with just sessions, just observing team sports, what have you. Is like, yeah, let's put them on a sled and whatnot, and it's like, yeah, go, but you're just exacerbating really bad positions, and you're not coaching the position. Versus if you step in and give them a little bit of a cue, like, hey, that resistance at your hips, like push through that resistance, like push your hips through that resistance, and just a little correction like that would make all the difference in the world. Because that's as much of a teaching opportunity as it is a stimulating opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's something we've covered before. Was like people starting to implement things into their training programs without fully understanding how to coach it, or even just understand why they're doing it, I guess, is just as good of a way to look at it. And just like you said, it's not like you have to explain the intricate details of everything that's going into the exercise, but just knowing how to like get a little bit more out of it. Yes, we can still have a lot of benefit from it, but only if we actually know how to make the small corrections while they're doing it.
Yeah. I think one of the worst things that anyone can do, including myself, because I've done this before, so I'll speak on it, is let's say you go to a coaching convention or a conference in the middle of the year. Like the coaches convention in track is in December, basically the middle of the year. The worst thing you can do is go to all these symposiums, and then like you love that idea, and then you implement it in the first month back. Like, don't do that. Even if it's like along the lines of what you do anyway, sit on it for a summer. Just sit on it.
Yeah.
Because just dive a little deeper and figure out, okay, how is this going to fit in to next year's cycle and next year's regime? Not like, how can I sneak this in right now? Because that is so cool, and I got to do that, and that's a great exercise. And you even see it on a daily basis with Instagram and Twitter, and like I've been guilty of it before. Like, I love that, I got to get that in there, but how does that fit into your current model of what you're doing? And you have to be really, really prejudicial in evaluating new information and how you can synthesize it into what you're already doing.
Yeah. I think that's a huge point that, you say you did it. I know I've definitely done it. I'm sure Joel's done it. Like, especially when you're young, that's the first thing you want to do is like, this is sick. Like, I got to throw this in here. And then you immediately don't know how to adjust anything once something goes wrong a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I the first time I spoke at the convention in 2012, when I was asked to do it, I was like, shoot, I don't know what I'm going to talk about, because I don't feel comfortable talking about acceleration, or like I haven't done enough to talk about what I've done. So what I did is I undressed myself, and I said, you know what, I'm going to talk about all the times I've screwed up so far, and give anecdotal examples, because some of the things I've screwed up on, I know for a fact other young coaches do this same stuff. And one of those mistakes was called a square peg round hole, like finding new exercises or new training programs and just like throwing it in without having an understanding or properly vetting it. And 2 times I got athletes hurt because of it, because of A, implementing it too soon or at the wrong time, and B, implementing it and not understanding the long-term effect of what that would have in my training protocol. So you just have to vet this stuff.
So a question I wanted to touch on, one of our previous episodes, we interviewed Zach Dakin, who's the baseball strength coach at TCU, and we got into it with him about tweaking, the intricacies of tweaking mechanics of pitchers, where it's like, hey, this got me to the Division I level. Maybe I've already even been drafted. Like, why do you want to mess with my technique, essentially? When working with sprinters, hurdlers, maybe it's, hey, coach, I did 10.55 in high school. Like when you do identify a tweak in, a race model or even just individual technique and shapes that they're hitting, how do you go about maybe managing the psychological side of that, of like, hey, you might be a little bit slower in the immediate, but it's going to help us out long term? And how do you manage that holistic sense of not just like, oh, I know as the coach I need to fix this and that'll help us get, like, the athlete also being like, well, I'm already fast, and then building off of that.
Well, off the bat, this is something I've started to do when I have situations like that, when it comes to either a technical piece to fix or address, not fix, but a technical piece to address, or even a training system that they're starting to adjust to. I've had athletes that have run faster in opening races, but say, coach, I don't think we're running enough. Like, I just don't feel like in shape. I'm like, you literally PR'd last weekend. What are you talking about? But they don't feel right. Let the 10.55 guy, I'll bring him in and we'll talk about it. I say, okay, do you want to run 10.45? I say, yeah, I want to run 10.45. Okay. Then we're not going to change anything. We'll do everything you want to do. Oh, all right, coach. I said, but if you want to run 10.25, we got to change. And it was just like this moment that this kid had, like, oh, they're like, yeah, we can do everything you want to do. We'll do everything that we've been doing, and you will get better. You'll get better, probably. But if you want to get here, there are some steps that we have to take to get to that next level. There are some things that we have to evolve and mature in. Number one. Number two, you can talk to them about empirical data. Like, hey, you're running faster. You can talk to them about, hey, this is going to be uncomfortable. Like, it's going to feel weird and different. Like, you change give them a cue that they don't like the sensation of pushing long. And that's a typical thing with sprinters is coming from high school, is they want to get out, they have to run fast and turn over. And you got to get them to feel a long push. And a lot of times it's an exaggerated, long, concentric phase. And they feel slow. And you tell them you have to lean into that. You have to lean into that uncomfortable feeling. All right. So part of that is just being transparent and acknowledging this is going to be different. Be careful about telling them that in advance. They might have to live it a little bit. And then you say, look, yeah, this is different. And I believe we're going to go in the right direction. And you know what? If it doesn't work out, you can put the blame on me. I'll take full ownership of it. But you gotta trust me on this. So there are a few different ways that you can go about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I even think like that's a thing that we've had to be cognizant of, and even like I've seen it elsewhere where it's the reluctance, like there's a ton of team sport athletes that need adjustments technically in their sprinting, like without a doubt. That's not even a question. But then it's like almost the reluctance to, because it's like, well, if I go and tweak his shapes in this 6-week winter block, he might get slower and test slower. And then it's like, well, are you just trying to get nice testing numbers to validate yourself, or are you actually trying to impact long term? And I think that's one area that was like, but when you actually flip the switch, and when it was like guys, like you could see the day where it was like they're frustrated, and then it like clicked, and they like whatever, when it was running a timed fly 10 or whatever it was, and they were like, oh, that felt good, like in that like aha moment where it's just like, yes, like okay, like they're getting it.
Yep.
But yeah, that's I've always like found it interesting to ask about that, especially from for sport coaches, where it was Zach handling the pitching and you handling like obviously the technical and tactical and physicals all together in track. But it's like, if I'm, it's easy to be like, I tweaked his squat form, sick, like great job.
Yep.
Or but if it's a quarterback and his throwing mechanics are horrible, like eventually it's got to be addressed. And like, but that's not necessarily an area that we get to impact on a ton as the sports performance coach. I'd say the sprint shapes is probably the number one area that we get to impact on. So I've always found it interesting in other realms where it's like, I've been
And
doing it
something,
the same way since I was 6 years old. Like, what do you mean you're going to mess with it?
and something you alluded to, I think, with accidentally, is you said, "Oh, I got this 6-week block," and too many times we don't get out of our own way. We get lost in the forest for the trees. You think, all right, I've got a 6-week block, and in my world, it's like I've got a 4-month preseason to get him ready. It's like I've got 4 months. I've got 4 years with this kid. Like, understand, like, the actual time that you're going to be allotted with this young man or young woman and this group of people, and remind the athletes of that as well. I think a lot of times we are always focused on, we got to maximize this moment, maximize this here, maximize this flight time, what is going to be holistically the big picture, you know? That's a really important piece. I think we lose sight on year to year. You know, what is going to be the long-term benefit versus the short-term reward?
Mm-hmm. I guess even touching on that technical aspect, cycling back to you as the recruiter hat, if you're seeing, like, how much do you analyze in terms of, like, okay, this kid, whatever, let's say he fits everything academically, personality wise, just looking purely at the X's and O's and the times. Like, if you've got a kid who, whatever, runs 10.6 with like a picture perfect race model and great technically versus whatever, a 10.7, 10.75, who was like clearly has not been coached much at all. Like, how do you like vary that of like, okay, like that kid's at that now, but I could get him to here? Like, how much of that goes into like your eye of watching kids run and not just being like, oh, this is the time and so this is where he could be? Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but the young assistant in me would be like, you see the kid, oh, I could do X, Y, Z with that kid. But now the recruiting coordinator, the director in me, like, I want more information.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what his training background is. I want to know what his personality disposition is. I want to know how coachable he is. You know, like, you can see this great athletic specimen in front of you that moves really well. There's a difference if that kid just came out from the basketball court, or if he's been in age group track and is in track full-time year-round since he was age group at age 10. You know, like, having that understanding. Does he come from a background where, like, hey, he's running repeat 400s? I'm like, yes, give me that kid. Or is he coming from a background of, like, he's well trained and he's doing fly 30s and he's doing speed power and I can just kind of keep that going? You know, I want to get a bigger picture of that kid. Are the shapes there? That is really exciting. That's really good. Or even if the shapes aren't there and they're running well, then it's like, yeah, there's some things that kid needs to improve on, but I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I'm going to change everything, because there's usually a reason that they're moving in a certain fashion. There's usually some sort of physical disposition that they have, and you just have to improve that model within that athlete's bandwidth. You know, like, for years, people critiqued Andre DeGrasse and that he's got kind of long arms, like, oh, he's got to keep his elbows at 90. And you know, you actually sit down with Stu McMillan and he's on record. It's like, no, there's a reason, because that's how he's balancing out and syncing up his timing, because he's got a hypermobile shoulder. He's got dysfunction at his opposing hip. Like, that's what that elbow has to do in order to sync up rotations through the T-spine. And it's like, oh, and everyone thinks, oh, you just fix that arm and it's going to be less wasted. It's like, no, that arm is the reason why he's able to actually run effectively without hurting himself. And that arm has gotten better over time because they've improved. His shoulder has gotten better. He's worked on dysfunction in the hip. So it's timing up better. It's sequencing better. So there's just a lot to investigate.
Yeah. That's just always something I've been curious about, not being fully tapped into the track world, where it's almost like that's how you could get like a steal almost in recruiting, is like, you know, like, he's running 10.6. These two kids are both the exact same time, but this kid has just been doing repeat 200s his entire time, and this kid's been actually doing good, that's like, I've always been interested in, like, even in super objective sports, like the background that goes into those objective numbers is probably weighing even more so on you as the recruiting hat of like, okay, how do we actually get there?
For sure.
Yeah. Cool. Cool. Andrew, do you have any questions that popped out that I wanted to touch on you, or we can kind of sneak one final question in here?
No, I think I'm pretty good on what I had for questions.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, this has been fun, guys. I think at the end of the day, something that, to bring it back full circle, is I appreciate the fact that you're reaching out just to a track coach and many track coaches, because we are, I guess, the original sports performance coaches, you know, and I've been lucky enough that a lot of the strength coaches that I've worked with have recognized that. And I'm not saying we are the end all be all, because we have a lot of work to do ourselves. I don't think enough track coaches look in the mirror and get a better understanding of that side of things in S&C. But, you know, so much of what we do is applicable in other areas of athleticism. I mean, I've had a colleague that was a throws coach that had a good sit down with the head volleyball coach, because the motion of like an overhead spike is so similar to a javelin throw, or even, you know, for pitching or something like that. You know, and like football linemen and the line coach talking to the throws coach and vice versa, because that's the type of athlete that you're working with. And, you know, it's just fun to talk shop with kind of a different branch in athletics.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know for both of us, that was kind of clicks in our career where it was like, I mean, you look at, say, a director of track and field, like you could hop in and, you know, if your whatever distance coach was out for the day for whatever reason, like you could step in immediately and just like boom, 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 or, you know, go for whatever event you want to say. Like you'd at least be competent enough to be like, all right, I know what these hurdles look like. I know what this javelin needs to look like. That sort of top down, like I understand everything underneath me to the point where I could coach it. And I definitely think if everybody in athletics took that like mindset, everything would advance so much. Like even for myself, we're looking in the mirror, it was like, all right, like if I'm trying to build up the physical attributes, say, of our quarterbacks, like how am I going to do that if I don't understand it well enough to the point where I could step in and, you know, break down a throw to the point where I could, you know, mechanically teach it or, you know, whatnot. It's like, I'm not even close to that. So I was like, okay.
Find the commonalities, you know, find the commonalities, find the congruencies, find the similarities. You know, you don't need to get down to the actual nuts and bolts, but do you know enough?
Yeah.
You know, can you find like, yep, the parallel thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and a moment for me that like set that off when I was young was I was at Nicholls State in Louisiana, and Boo lived like 10 minutes down the road, and he was telling us a story about like LSU had something happen with logistics, and they just asked him to like coach one of their throwers, and he'd never done it in his entire career, and he's like, yeah, no problem. And the guy goes and wins the world championships. And it was like,
oh, weird.
Yeah. Oh, what do you know? But it was like, oh, like that's what being an athletics coach actually is. Like you understand the underlying, you know, you don't necessarily have to know all the nitty gritty of everything, but you understand the underlying biomechanics and physiology and psychology of everything well enough where you can then, you know, okay, I'm taking on this project. I can take a few weeks and figure out the nitty gritty of it pretty easily because I understand like those basal constituents of everything. And so we've sought out track coaches as much as possible because you have to do that. And it's fun. It's just like inherent in the sport. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, to let any of your listeners know that they can reach out to me anytime, whether it's on Twitter, Instagram, or my email is easy to find at goterriers.com, gsanders@bu.edu, and I'd happy to do any consultant work or any like quick shop talk with anybody. I'm that guy. I like doing it.
Awesome.
Awesome.
Thanks, Don Coach. We appreciate you having on.
I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Don Coach.